Chapter 1. The Quiet Town. Dr. Trescott lived in a small and peaceful town. He was a kind man and everyone respected him. His wife Grace was gentle and caring. Their only son, Jimmy, was a happy boy. He loved to run, laugh, and ask 100 questions every day. The Trescott family was loved by many people because they always helped others. Dr. Trescott had a helper named Henry Johnson. Henry was honest, calm, and very loyal to the doctor. He worked hard and never complained. He liked to play with Jimmy when his work was done. Sometimes he lifted Jimmy in his arms and said, "One day you will grow taller than me." Jimmy laughed and said, "No, I will always be small so you can carry me." Dr. Trescott saw them and smiled. He said, "You both are good friends." One Sunday, there was a fair in the town. Dr. Trescott went there with his wife and Jimmy. Henry walked beside them, holding some toys for the boy. Jimmy's eyes were full of joy. He said, "Father, can I ride the merry horse?" Dr. Trescott nodded. Henry helped him sit and said, "Hold tight, little man." Grace looked at them and said softly, "He loves that boy so much." The doctor answered, "Yes, and we love him too." When they returned home that evening, Jimmy was tired but happy. He showed his father the small toy he had won at the fair. "Henry helped me," he said proudly. Dr. Trescott put his hand on Henry's shoulder. "Thank you for taking care of him," he said. Henry smiled. "He is like my little brother," he replied. The doctor liked that answer. He trusted Henry completely. Late at night, after everyone had eaten dinner, Dr. Trescott went to his small laboratory at the back of the house. He liked reading medical books there. Sometimes he mixed small medicines to test new ideas. Grace said, "Don't stay up too late." He smiled and said, "Just a few minutes more." Henry helped to clean the table and said goodnight. Jimmy was already in bed. He closed his eyes and dreamed of the fair, of the bright lights and toys. Henry sat outside for a moment. He looked at the doctor's laboratory window. The light was still on. He said quietly, "The doctor works too much." Then he walked to his room. Everything was quiet. Inside the laboratory, Dr. Trescott wrote a few notes and covered his bottles. He looked at the small flame under the lamp and said to himself, "I should stop now." He left the room and turned off the light, but one small candle still burned slowly near the table. The flame was small but alive. A few minutes later, a sound came from the corner of the room. A thin line of smoke began to rise. Nobody saw it. The house was silent. Henry was already asleep. Grace and Jimmy were in their rooms. The little flame on the table moved higher. The smoke touched the wall. It was the beginning of something no one expected. Dr. Trescott turned in his bed and whispered, "Did you hear something?" Grace said, "No, it's just the wind." He closed his eyes again. The night was still calm, but danger had already started its slow dance in the shadows. The fire was small, but it was growing, waiting for the next moment to show its face. Chapter 2. The Night of Fire. The night was quiet and everyone was sleeping. Dr. Trescott suddenly opened his eyes. He heard a strange sound. It was like something falling. He sat up and listened again. Then he smelled something sharp. He got out of bed and whispered, Grace, wake up. She said softly, "What is it?" He answered, "I smell smoke." Grace got up quickly. They both ran to the hallway. A light orange glow came from under the door of the laboratory. The doctor shouted, "Fire! The house is on fire!" He ran to the door, but the heat pushed him back. Flames were already growing on the walls. Grace screamed, "Jimmy! Where is Jimmy?" Dr. Trescott turned and shouted his son's name again and again. From upstairs, a small voice answered, "Father, I can't see." Smoke had filled the stairs. The doctor tried to go up, but the air was hot and dark. He coughed and fell back. At that moment, Henry came running from his small room. He saw the doctor and asked, "Where is the boy?" Dr. Trescott shouted, "Upstairs! He is trapped!" Henry looked up once. Then, without saying a word, he covered his face with a wet cloth and ran straight into the smoke. Grace cried, "Stop him! He will die!" But the doctor held her and said, "He is brave. Pray for them both." The fire grew louder. People in the town started running toward the house. Someone shouted, "Get water! Bring buckets!" But no one could enter. The whole front of the house was burning. Inside, Henry climbed through the smoke. He called, "Jimmy, where are you?" The boy coughed and answered, "Here, I'm scared." Henry reached him and lifted him in his arms. "Hold tight," he said. The stairs were half broken, but Henry went down slowly, holding Jimmy close to his chest. From outside, people could see the fire eating the house. The doctor shouted, "My son is inside," and tried to go in again, but two men stopped him. "You can't," they said. "It's too late." But suddenly, through the thick smoke, a dark shape appeared, near the door. Someone shouted, "Look, someone's coming out." It was Henry. His clothes were burning and his face was black with smoke. He held Jimmy in his arms. The doctor ran to him and took the boy. Jimmy was breathing, but weak. "He's alive," the doctor cried. Grace fell on her knees, crying with relief. Henry fell to the ground and didn't move. The people threw water on the fire, and slowly the flames went down. The night became quiet again. Dr. Trescott carried his son to safety. Then he looked at Henry lying near the road. His hands were burned. His face was badly hurt. The doctor knelt beside him and said softly, "You saved my son." The doctor called for help. "Bring a blanket. Hurry." Some men helped lift Henry. They carried him to a small cart. Grace held Jimmy close, whispering, "He will be fine." The doctor touched Henry's hand and said, "You will live too. You must." As they took Henry to the clinic, the doctor looked back at his house. The walls were dark, and the air smelled of smoke. But inside his heart, there was a mix of pain and thankfulness. His son was alive because one man had been brave enough to walk through fire. Chapter 3. The Silent Hero. The sun rose slowly after the terrible night. Dr. Trescott had not slept. He sat near the bed where Jimmy was lying. The boy's face was pale, but he was safe. When he opened his eyes, he whispered, "Father, is Henry all right?" The doctor said gently, "He is very hurt, but he is alive." Jimmy closed his eyes again and said softly, "He saved me." Those words stayed in the doctor's heart like fire. In the next room, Henry lay on a bed, covered in white sheets. His hands were burned, and his face had deep wounds. The doctor cleaned his skin and gave him medicine every few hours. Grace helped quietly. She said, "It's hard to look at him, but we must stay strong." The doctor nodded. "He risked everything for our child. We owe him everything." For many days, Henry did not speak. He only moved his head a little when the doctor called his name. Sometimes he tried to open his eyes, but the bandages were thick. Once, when he heard Jimmy's voice from the next room, a small smile appeared on his lips. The doctor saw it and said softly, "He still remembers. People from the town came to ask questions. One man said, 'Doctor, will he live?' The doctor answered, 'Yes, he will.' Another said, 'It's a miracle.' But when they saw Henry's burned face, they turned away in silence. No one stayed long. The doctor understood their fear, but it hurt him deeply. At night, Grace sat beside Henry's bed. She whispered, "You are safe now." Henry tried to say something, but no words came. Tears ran down his face, though his eyes were closed. She touched his hand gently and said, "You saved my son. You are brave." He moved his fingers slowly, like he wanted to thank her. One evening, after a long day, Jimmy asked, "Can I see him?" The doctor thought for a moment, then said yes. He took the boy to the room. Jimmy looked at the bed and felt afraid at first, but then he walked closer. He said, "Henry, it's me." Henry heard his small voice and lifted his hand a little. Jimmy took it and said, "You are my hero." The doctor's eyes filled with tears. Grace turned away and wiped her face. Days passed. Henry began to heal, but his face was still covered with scars. When he saw himself in a small mirror for the first time, he turned it away quickly. The doctor said, "Don't worry, you are alive, and that is what matters." Henry whispered very slowly, "People will be afraid." The doctor said firmly, "Then let them be. I am not afraid." Henry looked down and said, "Thank you, sir." The doctor answered, "You are part of this family now." But inside his heart, he knew the town might not see Henry the same way. He hoped time would change that. Late one night, Grace said quietly, "Will people ever understand what he did?" The doctor looked out of the window and said, "Maybe not now, but one day they will know he was the bravest man in this town." Henry slept peacefully that night for the first time. He had no dreams of fire. He only heard a small voice in his heart. The voice of Jimmy saying, "You are my hero." Chapter 4. The town turns cruel. A few weeks passed. Dr. Trescott's house was quiet again, but everything felt different. Henry could now walk slowly and speak a few words. His face was healed, but it looked very different from before. His skin had marks and burns that would never go away. When he first went outside to breathe the fresh air, people stopped and stared. They did not smile. They only looked at him and whispered to each other. Henry noticed it. He said softly to the doctor, "They are afraid of me." The doctor replied, "You did nothing wrong. You are brave, and they will learn that." The next day, Grace went to buy bread from the market. The woman at the shop asked quietly, "Is it true that your helper is still with you?" Grace looked at her and said, "Yes, and we are proud of him." The woman said nothing more but looked uncomfortable. When Grace walked away, she heard the woman whisper to another, "I could never live with someone like that." Grace felt a pain in her heart, but she stayed calm. People began to talk everywhere. Some said Henry's face was too frightening for children. Some said he should leave the town. A few even said the fire was his mistake. Dr. Trescott tried to stop the rumors. He told them, "Henry risked his life to save my son. Without him, Jimmy would be gone forever." But no one wanted to listen. They smiled politely and then walked away. Henry spent most of his time in the small room behind the doctor's house. He cleaned tools, arranged medicines, and helped Jimmy with small things. Jimmy still loved him. One afternoon he said, "People are bad. They call you names." Henry smiled faintly and said, "Don't be angry, little one. They don't know what they're saying." Jimmy shook his head and said, "If I were big, I would tell them to stop." Henry laughed softly and said, "One day you will be big, and you will be kind. That is enough." The doctor was proud of Henry, but he felt lonely too. He told his wife, "Everyone keeps the air distance from me now." Grace said, "We must stand with him. We cannot leave him alone." The doctor nodded. "Yes," he said, "but the town has turned cold." One evening, 2 men came to visit the doctor. One of them was the mayor. He said, "Doctor, people are worried. That man of yours scares children. Maybe it would be better if he went somewhere else." The doctor stood up and said calmly, "He saved my son. He will stay with me as long as he wants." The men looked at each other and left without a word. Grace heard everything and said, "They don't understand what courage looks like." The doctor replied, "No, they only see the face, not the heart." The next morning, a group of children followed Henry on the street. They pointed at him and laughed. One shouted, "Monster!" Henry stopped and looked at them. For a moment he said nothing. Then he said quietly, "You should not say that. One day you will know what it means to be kind." The children ran away. Dr. Trescott saw the whole thing from his window. His hands shook with anger. He said to Grace, "I want to leave this town." But she said gently, "No, we will stay. He needs us." From that day, the doctor stopped visiting many people. His friends no longer came to his home. But he didn't care. Every evening he checked Henry's bandages and talked to him about small things. Sometimes they sat together without speaking. Their silence said everything. It said loyalty. It said respect. It said friendship. Late one night, Grace looked at her husband and said, "You did the right thing. You saved a good man's soul." The doctor looked at Henry's small room and said, "He saved mine too." That night, the wind outside was calm, but inside the house, there was pain mixed with quiet strength. Henry had lost his old life, and the Trescotts had lost their place in society. Yet together, they had found something purer. a bond built on gratitude and truth. Chapter 5. The Doctor's Stand. The next few weeks were heavy for Dr. Trescott. People stopped greeting him on the street. Some even crossed to the other side when they saw him coming. He pretended not to notice, but inside his heart, he felt hurt. Grace said, "Let them talk. You did what was right." The doctor replied quietly, "Right things are not always easy." Henry continued to work silently. He helped the doctor in small ways. He cleaned tools and arranged bottles. He never asked for money or rest. The doctor often said, "You must take care of yourself." Henry smiled faintly and answered, "I am fine, sir." But everyone could see he was tired inside. One morning, the mayor came again, this time with 2 other men. They sat in the doctor's office and spoke in low voices. The mayor said, "Doctor, you know people are unhappy. They think your helper should leave. It's not safe for children. It's better for everyone." The doctor looked straight at them and said, "He saved my son. He is my friend. He is not leaving." One man said softly, "You may lose your patients." The doctor replied, "Then I will lose them, but I will not lose my honor." When they left, Grace entered the room. She asked, "What did they say?" He took her hand and said, "They want him gone, but I will never send him away." She said quietly, "Then we will stand together." He looked at her and said, "Yes, no matter what happens." That night, Grace went to check on Henry. He was sitting alone, cleaning old books with a soft cloth. She said, "You are still awake." Henry nodded. "I could not sleep," he said. "Doctor is losing friends because of me." Grace sat down beside him. "You are not the reason. People's hearts are small. They don't understand kindness." Henry looked down and whispered, "Maybe I should go." Grace said firmly, "If you go, you will break his heart. He calls you family now." Henry's eyes filled with tears. He said, "I will never forget what you both did for me the next day, Jimmy can, me home from school looking upset." He said, "Father, the boys at school laugh at me. They say I live with a monster." Dr. Trescott took him in his arms and said, "Listen, my boy. The world has people who laugh at what they don't understand. Henry is not a monster. He is a good man, and one day you will be proud of him." Jimmy said quietly, "I am already proud." In the evening, the doctor went for a short walk. 2 of his old friends were standing near the road. He stopped to greet them, but they only nodded coldly. One of them said, "You are making a mistake, Trescott." The doctor said calmly, "Maybe, but I sleep well at night." Then he walked away. Grace saw him return and said, "You look tired." He smiled weakly and said, "I am just learning how lonely truth can be." Henry tried to smile every day, but he could feel the doctor's pain. One evening he said, "You should not suffer because of me." The doctor put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Suffering for good is not a loss. You gave me my son's life. I can give you my peace." Henry looked away and said softly, "No one ever said such words to me before." Days went by. The doctor lost more patients, but he didn't care. He spent more time with Henry, helping him write, read, and walk better. Grace often brought tea and said, "We may have lost friends, but we found truth." The doctor smiled. Yes, truth and loyalty. One night as they sat together, the doctor said, "People may call him a monster, but to me he is the man who walked through fire for love." Grace held his hand and said, "And you are the man who stood against the world for justice." That night, there was silence, but it was a peaceful silence. The silence of people who had chosen to stand for what was right, even if they had to stand alone. Chapter 6. Henry's Lonely World. Days turned into weeks, and life in the doctor's house grew quiet again. The laughter that once filled the rooms was now rare. Henry worked silently in his small space behind the house. He tried to look normal, but he felt the weight of people's eyes even when they were not there. One evening he said to the doctor, "I don't go out much now. People stare too long." The doctor answered softly, "You don't have to hide, Henry. You did nothing wrong." Henry smiled faintly and said, "Still, it's easier when no one looks." Sometimes Grace brought tea for him and sat for a few minutes. She said kindly, "You should talk to us more. We miss your laughter." Henry said quietly, "I still laugh inside, ma'am, just not out loud." She looked at him with gentle eyes. "You have a strong heart," she said. Henry replied, "You and the doctor gave me that strength." One rainy afternoon, the doctor had to leave to visit a patient in another part of town. Grace and Jimmy stayed home. The rain was heavy and thunder rolled above. Through the window, Henry saw a little girl fall on the wet road. Without thinking, he took his coat and ran outside. He helped the child stand up and covered her with his coat. The girl looked at him and froze. She saw his face and screamed. Her mother came running, grabbed her, and shouted, "Don't touch her! Don't come near!" Henry stepped back, confused. He said, "I was only helping." But they ran away in fear. Later that evening, people in town started talking again. Someone said, "That man scared a little girl today." Another said, "He should not be walking on our streets." By night, the story had changed completely. People said Henry had tried to harm the child. When the doctor returned, he found two men waiting outside his gate. One said coldly, "Doctor, control your man. He is frightening everyone again." The doctor replied, "He is no threat. He only helped a child." But they didn't listen. They shook their heads and left. Grace was upset. She said, "Why do they lie like this?" The doctor sighed and said, "Because it is easy to hate what they fear." Jimmy came close and said, "I know Henry would never hurt anyone." The doctor smiled sadly. "You know that because you see with your heart," he said. That night, Henry sat alone. He looked at the coat that was still wet from the rain. He whispered to himself, "Even when I try to do good, they see evil." The doctor came in quietly. "I heard what happened," he said. "Don't let their words change you." Henry looked up and said, "Sometimes I wish I could be invisible." The doctor replied, "You don't need to disappear, Henry. You just need to keep believing you are right. For a few moments, they sat in silence. The rain had stopped. The doctor put a hand on Henry's shoulder and said, "I will always stand by you. You are part of our home." Henry nodded but didn't speak. He was grateful but tired inside. Later that night, Grace found the doctor sitting alone. She said, "He looks broken." The doctor said, "He carries too much pain. Maybe kindness is not enough to heal it." She took his hand and said, "Then we will give him more." The next morning, Henry woke up early and helped in the garden. Jimmy came to him and said, "Henry, don't be sad. I drew something for you." He gave him a small paper with a picture. It showed a man with a bright light behind him. Under it, Jimmy had written, "My hero." Henry looked at it for a long time. His lips trembled as he said, "No one ever called me that before." When the doctor saw the drawing, he smiled. "Keep it," he said. "Let it remind you that truth always shines, even when people close their eyes." Henry nodded slowly. For the first time in many weeks, he felt peace in his heart. The world outside was still cruel, but inside that small house, there was still love, the kind that does not change with fear or lies. Chapter 7. The Second Fire. Many months passed. Life in the Trescott house became simple and quiet again. Dr. Trescott did not visit many people now. Grace stopped going to gatherings. They had accepted their lonely life, and Henry remained with them like a quiet shadow of kindness. He worked every day, cleaned the instruments, helped in small things, and never complained. But deep inside, he still carried a wound that no medicine could heal. One evening, Dr. Trescott said, "Henry, do you ever think about leaving this town?" Henry looked at him for a moment and replied, "Where would I go, sir? The world is full of eyes that see only the outside." The doctor said softly, "Then stay here, where no one judges you." Henry nodded. "This is my home now," he said quietly. The town had almost forgotten about the fire. But one night, a new fire started, this time at a small shop near the main street. People were shouting and running. The sound of fear filled the night. Dr. Trescott was at home when someone knocked hard on his door. A boy shouted, "Doctor, there is another fire in the town!" The doctor ran outside, but before he could reach the place, he saw someone already there, throwing water on the flames. It was Henry. He was alone, trying to stop the fire before it spread. People stood far away and whispered, "Isn't that the same man from before?" "Why is he there again?" someone said. "Maybe he started it," another replied. But Henry didn't hear them. He only worked faster. He pulled down burning wood, threw buckets of water, and shouted, "Move back! The wall may fall!" Dr. Trescott ran forward and joined him. Grace arrived a few minutes later, crying, "Please be careful!" The flames were high, but together they managed to control it. The wind slowed, and after some time, the fire began to die. Henry's arms were covered in ash, and his clothes were torn, but his eyes were calm. He looked at the doctor and said softly, "It's over. A few men from the town's high aim closer." They didn't know what to say. One of them muttered, "He saved the place." Another said, "Maybe he was just lucky." Henry turned and walked away slowly. He didn't wait for thanks. He knew it would never come. Dr. Trescott shouted, "Henry, wait!" But Henry kept walking. The doctor saw people whisper again and felt pain in his heart. When they reached home, Grace helped Henry sit down. She said, "You did it again. You saved others." Henry looked at her and said, "No one believes me. They only see the fire and think I bring it." The doctor said firmly, "You don't need their belief. You have ours." Henry smiled weakly and said, "That's enough for me." The next morning, the town was full of talk. Some said Henry had started the new fire. Others said he had stopped it. No one knew the truth, but no one tried to find it. One man at the market said, "That man should leave for everyone's safety." Another replied, "He might save you next time, and you will still call him a monster." The man stayed silent after that. At home, Grace made soup and said, "We can't change what people think." The doctor answered, "No, but we can keep doing what's right." Henry sat quietly and listened. He said slowly, "I used to wish people would see my heart. Now I only wish they would stop fearing my face." Grace said, "Maybe one day they will." Later that evening, Jimmy came to Henry's room. He said, "I heard what people said, but I don't care. I know you are brave." Henry smiled and said, "Thank you, my little friend." Jimmy showed him a drawing again. This time it showed a man standing in front of a fire with light behind him. "That's you," Jimmy said proudly. Henry's eyes became wet. "You make me feel human again," he whispered. The doctor came in and saw them. He said softly, "The world may never understand, Henry, but we do. And that will never change." Henry looked at the doctor and said, "Sometimes I think the fire comes to test me, to see if I can still choose courage over fear." The doctor answered, "And every time you pass that test." That night, when everyone went to sleep, Henry sat near the window. The town outside was silent again. He thought about the fire, about the people, and about the fear that followed him everywhere. Then he looked at Jimmy's new drawing and smiled. For the first time, his smile was peaceful. He whispered to himself, "Maybe one day they will stop calling me a monster." His voice was soft, but full of hope. And for that one small moment, the world felt kind again. Chapter 8. The Real Monster. Time passed, and the story of the second fire slowly faded from the town's talk. People went back to their daily lives, but in the Trescott home, things were still quiet. Dr. Trescott worked less, Grace stayed close to her family, and Henry lived peacefully in the small room behind the house. Life had changed for all of them, but they had accepted it. One morning, the doctor said to Grace, "Sometimes I wonder if the town will ever remember what he did for them." Grace replied, "People remember what they want to remember, but we will never forget." The doctor smiled a little and said, "No, we never will." Henry spent his days helping in small ways. He cleaned the garden, fixed tools, and read the few books the doctor gave him. Jimmy often sat with him and asked questions. "Henry," he said one day, "will you ever go away?" Henry looked at him and smiled. "No, not until you grow taller than me." Jimmy laughed, just like he used to before everything changed. The sound made Henry's eyes fill with tears, but he quickly wiped them away. One afternoon, the doctor was sitting with Henry when a visitor came to the house. It was one of the men who had once asked the doctor to send Henry away. The man looked uneasy. He said quietly, "Doctor, I came to say something. That night of the second fire, I saw it. He saved us all." The doctor looked at him and said, "Why didn't you speak before?" The man answered, "I was afraid of what others would say, but I don't want to stay silent anymore." The doctor said calmly, "Truth never needs permission." The man left quietly, and the doctor turned to Henry. "You see," he said, "even the blind can see one day." Henry smiled but said nothing. As days passed, Henry became weaker. The years of pain and quiet sadness had tired him. The doctor tried to keep him strong, but he knew Henry's body had suffered too much. One evening, Grace found Henry sitting with Jimmy, holding a small paper in his hands. It was the old drawing, the one that said, "My hero." He looked at Grace and said, "This is my medicine. Every time I feel pain, I look at this." Grace held his hand and said softly, "You were always our hero." A few weeks later, Henry fell ill. The doctor stayed by his side day and night. One morning, when the sun was rising, Henry whispered, "Doctor." The doctor came close and said, "I'm here." Henry smiled weakly. "Tell the boy," he said, "never to be afraid of faces, only of hearts without kindness." Then he closed his eyes. Grace and the doctor stood beside him in silence. Jimmy placed the drawing on Henry's chest and said, "Goodbye, my friend." Tears filled everyone's eyes. But in that small moment, they all felt peace, because they knew the world had lost a good man, not a monster. A few days later, Dr. Trescott put a small wooden board outside Henry's room. On it he wrote, "He walked through fire, but his heart stayed pure." People from the town passed by, some in silence, some with guilt. No one spoke a word, but everyone knew the truth. That night, Grace said to her husband, "Do you think people will ever understand?" The doctor looked at the stars and said, "Maybe not all, but the ones who have hearts will." The story of Henry Johnson never left Willamville again. People stopped whispering his name with fear. And those who had once called him a monster now spoke of him with respect. The little boy who once drew a picture grew up and told everyone he met, "The real monster was never the man who walked through fire. The real monsters were the hearts that could not see his goodness,